good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. I'm Annette Richmond. This is Content Marketing School, and I'm so hang of, oh my goodness, okay. Apologies there. It just popped up on LinkedIn as I was checking it. So, thanks so much for joining us today. I am so excited to have Janice here with me today. We met at a networking thing at the tribe. We're both members of Richard von der Blom's tribe. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And I was listening to you talk about PR. We were having some kind of a fun discussion that day. And, I was so excited when you said yes to my invitation. So, as before we get started, please tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. So, a little bit about me. I have been in public relations for about 30 years, and I started off working for a very large agency called Hill and Knowlton, was I think the world's biggest at the time. Worked there for a number of years. Then I went client side, worked for companies like Procter and Gamble, worked in the real estate industry for a while. Then I started my own company, consulting for small and medium sized businesses. So I've spent about half of my career working for like the sort of service side of the business, the agency, working with clients, and like about half working on the client side, working with agencies. So I have a very well-rounded understanding of both, which I make good use of in what I'm doing now.
I know you do. So, I will just send a shout out. If you are out there in the audience, please do say hello. If you drop a question or comment in the chat, we will be able to see it here in the studio. So please do share any thoughts that you have with us. So, let's kind of dive right in because time goes by so quickly. And, we talked about this a little bit for a while, quite a while before you actually agreed to come on my show. And one of the main things that I hear from PR pros, I'll say PR pros, is that it's just all about tactics. Really, it's just okay, write articles and submit them, or uh, go ahead and try to get interviewed for article, everything. So what's your take on it? What would you like to share with us?
I think that's often true. I mean, I guess first of all, I would say a lot of times I think people might say, "Oh, I'd like to do some PR," but they don't really know what PR is. And so I think that causes them to maybe jump into the tactical side and not think about it strategically. Let me just say, just to start us off, that like one of the definitions of PR that I really like is from this person called Harold Burson. He was one of the founders of the PR industry, and he says PR is the business of creating and changing attitudes. So if you think about PR as about changing, as something where you're trying to change beliefs or attitudes, then, it might be by getting people to understand an idea. That's kind of like the political side, might be about introducing a product, could be about, so there's lots of different things that you can focus on. So if you're a business and you're trying to get people to understand about, what you do, I think the most important thing to take a strategic approach and not a tactical approach is to think about what your goal is. Who is your target audience? Who are you trying to reach? Because, a lot of people just say, "Oh, I want to be in Forbes," or "Oh, I want to be in the Wall Street Journal," or something. And it's like, if your audience does not read those publications, or if those publications are paywalled, then is there really value in you being there? Maybe not. I mean, it's still an ego boost, of course, but maybe it would be better for you to just look at being in an industry publication that your target audience reads, or maybe in a community paper if your audience reads that. So I think you need to figure out, what your goal is, and then, who is your target audience, and then look at where they go for information and put yourself there. And
No,
that's
I'm I'm sorry. Please, I didn't mean to cut you off.
that's okay. No, go ahead. I was just saying that's a strategic approach as far as I'm concerned.
No, that is so important, and I think people do think of the idea that, oh, if I could be in, I'll just say the New York Times because it's the first thing that comes. If I could be in that, it would be prestigious for me. I could say that I was quoted there. Um, but it's so true. If that's not where your audience is, if I'm trying to sell my training or something to salespeople or something, then I want to be in that sales magazine giving some advice. I don't, which is a smaller, it's,
Yeah.
other people wouldn't know what it was, but it's really important,
Tar
to
targeted.
know.
Yeah, you can take a targeted approach, and that's something that PR allows you to do. It's to look at it kind of, more surgically and say, in a targeted way, where should I be? And I mean, the other thing is people don't really read. I mean, the reality is they don't. They don't read. They don't have much of an attention span. So, you may be in places and like this might sound counterintuitive. I'm telling you get PR, but people don't read. But the thing is, that you can still be in a place where your audience might read if they're going to read. But even if they don't, I mean, you can take that article that you get in that industry publication or whatever it is, wherever it is your audience looks, maybe they just look at the headlines. But then you take that article and you put it in other places like in your sales material, on your website, on your socials. They see it there. They might not read it there, but you're still getting the benefit of the credibility, which comes from what PR also delivers, which is that third party endorsement type thing. It's like the good housekeeping seal of approval from that
Yes.
publication for you. And that's one of the things you get from PR that you don't get from advertising.
Yeah, and I love that you mention that because I've been talking a lot lately, reading a lot about it and talking to other people about it in terms of content for content marketing or even in terms of books that people, I've been reading. I did something like this little certification thing on LinkedIn, and they were talking about people want snackable content. So they want to read, they want to watch your quick 2-minute video or maybe even a 5-minute video if it's in depth, or they want to read a little quick carousel or blog post. They don't want to read your white paper. People don't want, to download your white paper. They would rather download a cheat sheet with like 10 items on it that they can actually use. And so I love that. So one of the things that I think I asked you about before, because you mentioned Forbes, and I know that they are a sort of a lot of the stuff on there is sort of pay to play, like the different councils they have. I was in the coaches council for a while. They have them for a few different things, and those come in at different sort of different price points. So, and I have heard, and I know there's other organizations like that, as well. So what's your take on that? Because you're talking about that seal of approval. I have heard that if you are writing or putting your content in something like that, that there is a little bit of a stigma to that. So I'm curious about, what do you think?
Well, I think that like there can be a stigma. It depends. I mean, I will say that a lot of times what you're describing when it's pay to play is advertorial, right? It's always been around advertorial. You've always been able to buy a page in a publication and it says usually advertorial on the top. And if people see the word advertorial and they also look at the format, it doesn't exactly look like the publication. You tend to skip over it and think of it as an ad. It doesn't look like the rest of like the news part of the
Mhm,
paper, the
mhm,
editorial. So I think if you
mhm,
buy that in Forbes or any other publication, first of all, you're risking people noticing that it is not like the other editorial and that it might be an ad, right? So they may actually notice, why does this look different? It might be an ad. I'm not going to look at it. But even if they don't notice, and a lot of times they really don't, they don't see the word, they don't notice. I mean, you know, there may not be a stigma, but there's a lot of the messaging is much more salesy. It's much more, people tend to talk about their books and whatever they're doing, and it's not as objective a message. So you start reading it, and you're also thinking, this seems odd. Why is this so much about this person when I'm reading Forbes? Isn't it supposed to be more objective than that? And so there's that. And then the other thing is that Forbes has different levels. So there's like maybe there's the pay to play council level where you're paying a fee annually to be part of that
mhm,
council. But
mhm,
then there's also the editorial level where you can be a contributor editorially. What's the problem with that is they expect you to crank out one article per week, let's say, or one article per month or two articles per month on a regular basis for the entire year, and you get paid very little to do it.
mhm,
And it tends to be paywalled. So the people who are reading it people can't access it because they have only a limited number of free articles per month, like maybe one or two.
mhm, mhm.
And then your stuff is there, but nobody sees it because it's behind a paywall. So like if you're going to do anything like that, I think what you need to make sure is that you understand what you're getting into, what it costs, how frequently you have to contribute, whatever it is, make sure you have a good understanding of what that is and whether that is going to help you meet your goals. Because if it isn't, then don't do it.
Yes, I know that I, for one, am much more strategic about kind of everything that I do right now. But I really appreciate that you brought up the whole idea of the paywall, because that's even true. Let's say, I was a PhD or something, and I wanted to be quoted in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, or a publication like that. That also would be behind the paywall, most likely, because the same type of thing, that if someone's sharing an article, or even if I'm sharing an article that I was quoted in, if it's behind that paywall. And so, before we move on, can you give us just a general tip of how to know if something is going to be behind a paywall? I mean,
The thing I mean, when you're doing it, and if you're contributing a quote or if you're being interviewed, you should always do a little bit of research. Just Google the publication, Google the name of the journalist, and you'll be able to find pretty quickly what if it's behind a paywall because you won't be able to access it. If and I mean those paywalls have been around forever. Like there's always been, publications that have been paywalled long before, the internet became a real sort of prevalently, like now there's a lot of paywalls. There used to only be some. But what I do with paywalled articles is I will pay to get the, access to the article. And then when I have access to the article, I will take a pull quote. So I will take something out of that article that is relevant to what my client is talking about,
Mhm.
and I will publish that with a link to the article, and I will maybe say it is behind a paywall. But you
Yeah.
can still take something out of the article that is relevant to your audience to give them a sense of what you've talked about, so you can still benefit from the prestige of being in the publication. But, if you're going to do that all the time, people are not going to be able to read the articles,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
you can still get some benefit from it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that strategy, because I wouldn't, I don't know. I'm not a PR person like you are, so, I wouldn't have
That's how
thought of
I get
that. The
around
idea,
it.
but the idea of taking, your as a part of it, and sharing that, because I'm sure for editorial purposes it's okay. I mean, I know from being a writer in the past that you can take a little bit of something and share it, as long as you're attributing and putting the link and everything. But I like the idea of noting that this is on behind a paywall, because I know for me personally, sometimes I'll click on something and then it's behind the paywall. And then even if I can get in free, I've got to stop and put my name and my email. And it's like, not worth it. I just go away. So I think that I have never heard that before, but that sounds like a fabulous strategy. So what, if you can share, just, maybe 3 mistakes that people make. I'm guessing one of them is having no plan, but based on what you've already said, but besides that, can you give us a few things that people are, that are gonna be listening to this maybe on the podcast, and they're like, "Oh, I do that all the time."
Okay, so I guess the first thing would be, and this is very important because I think I say it to almost every single person that I talk to. You need to have an objective for what you're doing. Don't just randomly go after a journalist or a publication without understanding why you're doing it. So have a plan or an objective. You don't have to have a whole plan, but just have an objective, like I am doing this for this reason. Because when people ask me, like they say, I want, like people call me up and want media coverage, and I say, they say they want to be in the Wall Street Journal. And then I say, why?
Mhm.
And they don't necessarily haven't even thought it through, and it turns out like their target audience doesn't even read that publication, so then we rethink the whole thing. So I'm just saying, have an objective and write your objective down, and that's step 1. Step 2 would be to think about, well, like what's your headline that you would love to have about your objective, and where would be the best place that you could have that headline? What's your dream headline and what's your dream outlet? And then go to that outlet and start reading it, and read it for maybe a month and get a sense of, what is this article? What does this outlet write about? Who are the writers I like? What might be appropriate for my topic? And then write down the name of 1 or 2 people that you might want to pitch. And then start following those people, like just looking at the publication, the news outlet, or maybe follow them on LinkedIn or socials to see what they publish. And then wait for an opportunity to where something comes up where you might have an opinion,
Mhm.
about that topic. And that's when you can pitch them. You can say, "Hey, I read your article on such and such. I thought it was great for these reasons. This is what I do. Give your credentials. Here's kind of my 2 cents on that topic." And then, this is an email you would send them, and then like see how they respond. And, you might get something back where they say, "Oh, that's really interesting. I'd love to talk to you." You might get something back that says, "You know what, that's an interesting thought, but I'm done and I'm not really, going to do anything further." But the thing is, in today's world, print articles in particular are filed and they get updated throughout the day. So, like, even though they start off with something in the morning, well, whatever they file, they may add to the article if they are looking for more content or more points of view. So that's why it's worth giving your 2 cents even after something's been published. Also, you're establishing your relationship with the person. But the other reason is because, you know, articles are print articles in particular are constructed around quotes a lot of the time. And
Mhm.
journalists are always looking for sources. So even if you're not an appropriate source for this particular article, if they see what your point of view is and your credentials, they may say, "Can I reach out to you in future?" And that would be the beginning of a relationship. That's
No,
what
I
I do.
No, no, I love that, I love that, and I'm going to assume because we've been talking a lot about publications, but I'm gonna assume that your advice would be the same if you wanna be on a podcast or something, because
Yeah.
I know that I get contacted constantly by PR firms who are pitching me. Some of the recent pitches I got was a, CFO gonna come on content marketing, come on my show and talk about financial something. I got something from a PR person to have a matchmaker on my show recently. And the third one I'll mention is someone who is going to talk about AI, has a firm that does AI for businesses, and he's going to wants to come on my show and talk about that. And I'm thinking, do you even know the name of my show? Have you ever once listened to it? Or I get a pitch, and every single pitch references the same show. So I'm guessing that they just somehow, I don't know, somebody fed it to them and they all pitch it. And it's just, it's so annoying.
Yeah, I think, like, as I said at the beginning, PR is the business of creating and changing attitudes, and there's lots of ways of doing it. Media coverage is one, being on podcasts, influencer relationships where you can do work, work with an influencer, speaking engagements, attending events, but it doesn't matter what you're doing. You should always start with that goal and that research, because the reason why what you're saying, what you're talking about happens with podcasts, and it happens with journalists all the time, is that people take this spray and pray approach. They write their pitch, they send the same pitch to everybody. They don't do any research. They just think, "Okay, I'll just send this out to 100 people, and like if I get 5 responses, then I'm ahead of the game." And maybe that's true, I don't know, but you've burned a lot of bridges, because if a journalist gets an irrelevant pitch, and they get them all the time, and they make fun of them and they post them on Twitter, I mean, they're absurd, right? Just like what you described.
Mhm.
They will also block you. So, that's it. You're not getting through to that person in future, because they are going to block you. And journalists are notorious for doing that, because they are on deadline. This is
Mhm.
their job, and they don't have time for that. You know what I mean? They don't have
Mhm.
time for it. So, and it's a lack of respect. So they get very, very annoyed by it. So yeah, always do your research first and make sure that your pitch is appropriate, and make sure that you know who you're talking to.
No, no, I appreciate that, and I know it's, I guess podcasts are hot right now because I get pitches for that. I get pitches for my former podcast that it's still up there, but it's archived. I haven't put a new episode up in over a year, but it's there because it's got a lot of great information. So we are just flying through time as it always does. I don't want you to obviously share your trade secrets, but can you just give us a couple of things? Now, I mean, I love you've shared so much already. If you care, just I don't know, maybe one or two little tidbits that people listening to the podcast or would say, hmm.
Well, I mean, I think that I guess one of the things I would say is that there is a bit of a preoccupation right now in the PR kind of realm with submitting articles as sort of like the way to go with PR. Like if you want to do PR, people just think that that means writing an article, submitting it to some type of a publication, and then you've like ticked off PR, which is not true. PR is a lot more than that. But even with just the whole notion of media relations, I mean, I would not advise somebody to contribute an article, which is what that is, as their first foray into PR, because writing an article is time consuming. It's difficult. Writing is not easy. Getting it accepted is not easy. I mean, despite what people might say, it's not. So
Mhm.
instead of doing that, what I would suggest people do, and what I do suggest, is that they do what I just described earlier, which is figure out where you'd like to be, find a journalist that you'd like to, that you think you'd love to be quoted by, and then submit a quote. That is your PR, your first media strategy if you're a beginner. Submit a quote, not an article, because a quote, you don't need any experience for that. All you need is a point of view. You need a relevant point of view, a point of view that's relevant to the journalist that you're submitting it to. So, like, if you're standing outside a burning building, and the building's on fire, you're relevant to the journalist who's writing about the fire, right? You don't have to have any special expertise. So that's what I mean. If you called up a newsroom and said, I'm standing in front of such and such building, it's on fire, they might ask you for a quote, and they might publish that quote. So it's the same thing with, like, the topic that you want to speak about. You don't have to have a huge resume. You just have
Mhm.
to have a relevant point of view that would be interesting to the journalist's audience and the journalist. And that's kind of like if that's your first foray, it's way less time consuming and way less of a risk.
And that sounds like something that I've heard of before, and I know you have. I've heard you mention it as well. That's called like newsjacking is like jumping on timely stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, newsjacking is a bit different because newsjacking is kind of like taking a trending topic and
Mhm.
saying, "Oh, I'm going to talk about this trending topic," and that's a good idea as well. But
Okay,
I'm
okay.
saying that even if it's not a trending topic, even if it's just some article about something that you just happen to have an opinion about, send, because like I did that, for example, when you want to get to know a journalist, like there was a marketing writer for the Globe and Mail, which is Canada's national daily, that I wanted to get to know many years ago, and I reached out to her because she wrote an article about Labatt beer and this issue that had come up for them. And I was able to talk to her about working with the legal department when you have an issue come up on a brand. And I have worked for Procter and Gamble. I've done a lot of that type of stuff. And so I was speaking to her. I was introducing myself to her as a source on that topic. And she added me to her article and quoted me. And that's how we got started. And then we, got to know each other.
Well, I love that, and we are getting so close down to the wire. And before I ask you, to share any final thoughts that you have, things that we haven't talked about, you think are important. I just wanted to share your LinkedIn profile. I love your banner. I think it's so great, and it's just absolutely. It's such a great tool. Sorry about that. I don't know why I didn't turn off my phone. Anyway, so are you open to connecting with people? I know that you do have some really good materials in your featured section, that people can, you have a checklist here that people can find out a guide, and you do share, content pretty regularly, I think, on LinkedIn. Are you open to connecting with people?
Yeah, sure. I'm on LinkedIn every day. I try to post Monday to Friday. I do definitely post resources and information about PR and information about management generally, communications related usually. So, yeah, for sure. And I have a free guide there on how to get quoted in the media. So, that's also available. So, yeah, definitely reach out to me if you have any questions or anything.
Well, awesome. So the last thing that I always like to do, I have learned so much from you. I feel like I know a little bit. I mean, I don't, obviously I don't know a lot, but I felt like I kind of know a little bit about PR, but I've just learned so much from you. So is there anything that you'd like to share, that I haven't asked you, you haven't shared, just wasn't part of our discussion, before we say goodbye?
Not, I think I've covered the entry level stuff. I don't want to get too technical with people. I mean, the only other thing that I would say is that messaging is very important, and that another thing that's worth paying attention to, maybe after you get your feet wet with some outreach, is working on kind of your overall message. Because if you go and speak to a journalist and just answer their questions, that's fine, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get across what you want to say. In order for you to get across what you want to say, you have to prepare in advance and know what that is. Because then you can find ways to weave it in.
Okay, can you give like a quick example of what that would be? Let's say it's me and I want to talk about video marketing and a journalist, because kind of hot topic right now when journalist comes to talk to me. What would I do to what do you recommend I would do to sort of prep for that call?
I would sit down and I would, like, the day before, a couple of days before, and I would be thinking about one message that's general on the topic. So something general about video marketing, that,
Mhm.
why it's a trend right now. Then maybe something specific about you, why what you do in the space, what your background is, so that people, when you speak, they believe you, they understand what your credentials are. And then maybe a third message, which is something about what you're trying to teach, which is like some tips about, how people can be better at video marketing, like one or two basic tips. And
Mhm.
then just some kind of fourth message that's just a summary. And if you were to get across those things in your interview, then people would have a good understanding of what you were trying to say.
Wow. That's great. So obviously have a plan, maybe have notes or have that kind of outline so that you know where you're going to go. Which is perfect because that's what you said. You don't want to start getting down into the weeds or rambling. I think that happens often when people, even if they're on a job interview, where they start talking and they don't have a plan and they're just rambling away, and before you know it, or if you're talking to a reporter, journalist, I'm sure they're all kind of like, and you're still talking and, you've lost them. You've lost them. And if you're on the phone or something, you may not even know that they're,
Well, it
on
goes
on
by quickly,
LinkedIn
and
or something.
when you're talking to somebody, it goes by very fast, and you just want to make sure that you get across what you want to get across.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I thank you again so much. Again, I have learned so much from you today, and I thank you so much for being here. And to everyone else, thanks so much for joining us. And I'll be seeing you next time.
Thanks, Annette.